Hey, this is Joe. Dorothy just called me and said she would like Gus to send the link to her email.
Okay.
Hey, Chief Saganik, are we backing up the city again this evening?
Sorry, Keith, I was eating some chips. I went for the pizza guy to get here and deliver dinner. Yes, we have a big contingent again tonight for the protest. We're backing up the city, and of course we're focused on keeping all the people, all the citizens of the county safe too.
Excellent. Yeah, I was watching for you to take a bite before I asked you. Thank you.
Yeah, I've got the pizza guy like ready to deliver pizza any minute from now, so I might have to jump off just for a second.
Rick, I've got some homemade pizza dough rising outside right now, just waiting for this to end.
You know what? Since I've come to Rockford, I have found the best pizza. I mean, Rockford has great pizza.
Where's your favorite?
Napolini's probably. Am I saying it right?
Close enough.
Yeah, I mean, I've been all over, but I've probably gotten pizza from about half a dozen different places, and it's fantastic.
I grew up on Rosati's here, the old one back down on 251.
You like Rosati's? I mean, you get to Rosati's is good. I don't disagree with that, but it's the same pizza wherever you go. I mean, you can get that anywhere. But Rockford has some authentic Italian pizza.
If it's what you grow up on, man, it's hard to say no to it.
Yeah, I get it. And actually, Rosati's is what I got coming. So.
All right, we've got 5:41. I'm going to call this meeting to order. The combined meeting of Operations Administrative Committee and Public Safety. With your permission, Mr. Booker, I'll call the roll for the both of us. Mr. Booker, are you here? He's looking intently. Mr. Booker is here. Ms. Crosby.
Here.
Mr. Butita.
Here.
Mr. Hoffman.
Here.
Miss Red. Are you with us, Miss Red? I see your icon down there.
I think she's trying to get on.
Okay, I'll come back to her. Mr. Salgado? There he is. You got a thumbs up. Mr. Arena, has he joined us yet? I don't see him just yet. I know he's frantically trying.
I'm here, Mr. McDonald.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Arena. I didn't see you. Mr. Westcott? Miss Coral?
Present.
Miss Feller, or Mr. Fellers, excuse me.
Wow, here.
I apologize, sir. So we do have a quorum of both committees. I apologize. Can I get a motion for the approval of the July 12, 2018, April 8, 2019, May 16, 2019, and June 6, 2019 combined minutes of Operations Administrative and Public Safety? Motion by Ms. Crosby, second by Mr. Hoffman. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Is there anybody opposed? And we shall mark approval for all members present. Thank you. Mr. Chapman, have we anybody to speak from the public?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Moving on to E, an ordinance amending Chapter 50 of the Winnebago County Code of Ordinances related to food establishment operations during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can I have a motion for that? Motion by Mr. Fellers, seconded by Ms. Crosby and Mr. Hoffman. The item is now before us. Dr. Martell, are you here to speak to this?
Yes, I am.
What?
So essentially, this ties the guidance documents and changes that are made as part of the uh, changes that are related to the food code, to the food permits. And so it puts really, again, one of the processes, the hearing process that we would have for enforcement related to guidance, as well as protections for the food establishments, again, to go through the permit process. So violations, if let's say, for instance, they were selling something that they shouldn't be, like right now, they're allowed to sell closed containers. If we found that they were selling open containers, we would go through an education process and we would tie anything to their food permit. It would go through the hearing process.
Thank you, Dr. Martell. Is there anybody else that was, I do have comments on this subject as well. Is there anybody else? I see Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my concern with this is paragraph G. It's very open-ended. For me to support this, the guidelines that we're imposing would have to be defined, and it would have to have a date certain for it to expire and possibly be renewed after that point. And then I guess my question after Dr. Martell's comments is, the hearing occurs where and who presides over that hearing?
Dr. Martell?
I'll make sure I got that right. Okay. So first of all, it was meant to be, and to your point, Mr. Arena, I understand that it appears to be open-ended because the guidance are changing as we move through the phases. So we did not want to have to keep coming back every time the phase allowed some expansion or there might be changes. In terms of the hearing, we go through the state's attorney's office through a hearing, code violation hearing. So that is how the permits are handled. So we first go out and do an education process, which is what we're doing right now. And again, provide education, and then we would continue to monitor that situation. If they continued to be in violation, then we would take them through the hearing code process. Charlotte, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and actually it doesn't go through the it doesn't go through the regular code hearing process. It goes through the health department. There's a process in place
Right, I'm
for
sorry.
if food permits are suspended, then it goes through their process, and then they could take it to the court if they wanted administrative review of that.
So follow up, who presides over that hearing?
At the health department, it's again, our environmental health.
That's correct.
Are you satisfied, Mr. Arena? If so, I'll go on to Mr. Fellers.
No, yeah, thank you. They answered my question.
Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question then. Obviously, this is to be in place through the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. What is the policy, or I guess what is the strategy for declaring it over? At one point, will Springfield say this is now over, or we are no longer in a pandemic? Will the governor say that? Will we no longer, extend the emergency declaration the moment we don't extend the emergency declaration? What is it that defines that end date?
I think a combination of all of the above. Again, we would be looking toward guidance. I mean, as we move through those phases of the state of Illinois, that's part of the governor's and the Illinois Department of Public Health would be going through that process, because remember, our authority as a health department flows from the state of Illinois through the Illinois Department of Public Health as a certified local health department. So we would not be able to independently declare that the pandemic was over. We would be going through the process with the state.
So I guess the quick follow-up was that, will the state say, okay, this day right here, we've all moved into the last phase and the pandemic is officially over, right? Will there be a hard cut?
There would be official communication indicating that the pandemic was over.
Mr. Booker.
Okay, now I'm good. Okay, because I've got a proclamation that I'm trying to push forward here. And right now, I'm not trusting the state of Illinois. I'm not trusting the governor. I don't like the state of Illinois being lumped in with Chicago's numbers. We're certainly doing a whole lot better out here. And the entire state is doing better than the Cook County and the Collier counties. I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of seeing our big box stores that are just jam-packed with people and our small restaurants suffering. And outdoor eating, no, I think we can go to indoor eating now. I think we need more people on board as far as offering an opinion on when we can start relaxing. I'm not asking for an end to the pandemic, but we need to relax things quite a bit more than we are, because it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to have the box stores open and the small businesses closed. I also have farmers markets out in my district that are suffering right now. Got a guy with a pizza oven that's about ready to shut down because of the restrictions, the unbelievable restrictions placed on him. And then a guy wants to bring in his produce and eggs, and he's got restrictions placed on him, and we're tired of it. And I want to be a bigger voice on this environmental restrictions. So we've got to take a look at this. I'm not going to wait for Chicago and the governor of Illinois. That's all I got to say about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Is there, again, I do have comments, but is there anybody else who has comments that wishes to speak to this first? Mr. Haney, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. So just help me understand, if we didn't pass this, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't pass this, but if we don't pass this, what happens? Just so I understand how it handcuffs the health department, if at all. And two, is this consistent with what other health departments are doing throughout the state? I don't know if that's going to Dr. Martell or Charlotte.
I can't answer whether this is consistent. It came from our department as a way to enforce the guidelines to protect the public health, to protect the employees at these restaurants. If we don't pass this, the option is to go in for closure orders if they are violating the guidelines, and it is putting the public health at risk. So that's the other option. It's just more time intensive to do that.
Dr.
Well, and again, I think our goal was to put it out front with our establishments. Again, rather than going through a closure process, I think that is much more, I think that's much more dangerous to most of our facilities if we have to close them down and then wait for them to go through the process to reopen. So our goal was to put this out there in front. Our food work group, just so everyone's aware, we have over about 50 different establishments that work with us. I understand you may feel that we should be opening in a much more rapid pace. We did open ahead of Chicago. We are in what's considered the North Central region. And we continue to monitor the situation. Those capacity limits, I understand, are frustrating. We also, again, that is in terms of the big box stores, they also have capacity limits put on them. But we really need to see how this plays out. We are not out of danger here, folks. I know that there are individuals here who believe that this is not impacting. But the fact that we are all able to even convene a meeting, that you're all here, really because of staying put. Unfortunately, yes, it has been impacting some of our major services. We are opening them back up. The number of violations and complaints that are coming out of our local businesses has been very small as we reopened. And I think that's a testimony and testament to the work that's been done by the groups to start that process and phasing of reopening. In terms of farmers markets, I want to be clear with again, on the discussion on that, we are not issuing temporary food permits during this time frame because those are typically festival type activities. So in the case of, we understand there's a couple of eggs and meat, it's actually under the organizer's permit that they can actually sell eggs and like fresh produce and things like that at a farmer's market. And those are governed under different, we do not issue permits for those types of events.
Can I just ask a follow-up then, specific to my question on if the board would vote against this, and again, I'm not suggesting you should, that leaves you with less one less tool in this situation. You're left with just the hammer. Then, right? Or if I'm misstating this, feel free to correct me just for context.
Yes, the tool that we would have would be closure.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the state's attorney. I'd like to just weigh in on that if I could.
Sure, please do, ma'am.
Okay, so initially when all of this started, we did have a couple of letters that we had to send out to, I think we sent 2 out to different businesses. And in the letter, we were trying to instruct them on the procedure. I think this is a way, as the chairman said, to preempt that. Our goal is to educate individuals so that they understand what is required. And I think when the businesses know what is required, they will comply. And so it's not meant to penalize them, just to give them the standards that they should follow. If they have questions, Dr. Martell will work with them, because we don't want to have to issue a closure order and to bring them into court, because that would obviously detrimentally impact their businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Mr. Arena.
I move that we lay this over until the guidelines that are going to be imposed are incorporated into the, and to set a sunset on it, a 45-day.
I really hate to say this, but you cut out through half of that, Mr. Arena. You moved to lay it over, and then I'm
Okay, hold on, Mr. Chairman.
try
Could we
again.
ask, could we ask Mrs. Red to mute her phone? I think she's causing some interference on the line.
Mr. Ed, can you mute your phone, please?
Hello? You want my phone muted?
Yes, please.
Can you hear me?
You got a lot of background noise and is preventing Mr. Arena from speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just the wind. I had my window down. Okay.
Now somebody's got music. Thank you, Mr. Fellers, for that suggestion. Mr. Arena, I did hear your motion to lay over. What did you say after that?
Until the guidelines that were going to be imposed can be incorporated, and to include a sunset of 45 days, or until the state changes the criteria and we have to change again.
Mr. Arena is that a second, Mr. Fellers? Is there a second for the motion? Speak up, because I'm not seeing a second. Mr. Booker has a second on the motion. The motion was made.
Dorothy Red, second.
So it's been seconded by Mr. Booker and Mrs. Red. Okay, so the motion is to lay over. Did you want to speak to layover, Mr. Fellers?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the layover. I think as Dr. Martell said, and as the state's attorney said, the remedy without this in place is closure. And if maybe we want to make some changes down the road, sure, we can look at that. But, closure versus a hearing is a completely different story, and certainly more disruptive to the day-to-day lives of businesses.
Sure. I see Mr. Arena and Charlotte's hands up. I'm going to give real quick, as far as layover. The 11th whereas, it cites the county codes 55 ILCS, authorized county boards and the counties with health departments to license and regulate food establishments. So that means us county board, we do have some regulation. We can help regulate it. And the 13th whereas, it mentions chapter 50, article 3 of the ordinances. This is showing me that we have other things we need to look at that pertain to this subject, in my opinion, and how these other things affect what we're voting on or possibly laying over this evening. The 17th whereas, again, has until such a time the COVID-19 pandemic is over, which I agree with Mr. Arena, it's not definitive, it's very open. I think we need to work with our business owners. I know Dr. Martell spoke earlier about the fact that most people have been compliant. I think that's because most people want to do the right thing. Most of us as humans, we want to do the right thing. We want to protect each other. We want each other to be safe. But at the same time, I have a different level of risk than maybe Dan Fellers or Joe Hoffman. I don't think that us hammering down, tightly controlling what can be open, what cannot be open. For example, right now, I support all restaurants indoor open 33%. I support 25 people at weddings, 25 people at funerals. I think we need to start moving forward. I don't for one moment endorse going back to February 1st and opening the gates wide up, but I think we need to start making more aggressive actions to get back to normal. And that was what I had for my soapbox. I had Mr. Arena, Charlotte, and then Ms. Crosby.
I want to just be clear, I'm not suggesting that we kill it. I just want to know, to be able to see right in front of me, what are the guidelines that we're going to be imposing? That's all. I'm sure they exist. It wouldn't take long to, attach them to this document and revisit the issue. So I just want everyone to understand, I'm not suggesting we kill it.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Ms. Leclerc.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak quickly to the guidelines. The guidelines we're referring to are the DCEO guidelines that are available on their website and have been for a week and a half, I guess now. So we can certainly provide those. And then there are some that were developed by the health department in conjunction with the food work group. So those are in addition to those guidelines. So we can also get those out tomorrow.
I thank you very much, ma'am. Ms. Crosby. And after Ms. Crosby, Dr. Martell.
I'm looking at this, and these restaurants have suffered enough, guys. They need to be able to at least move the ball a little bit forward, and I can't support laying it over. Dr. Martell had a group of 50 look at all of this. It's been seen by a ton of eyes. We can come back and revisit it at a different hour, but these guys need to get back to work. And to hold this over, to me, is a tremendous disservice to small business owners. So I can't support it. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby. I'll go Dr. Martell, then Mr. Fellers.
And again, what we were talking, and Charlotte was correct in the referring to the guidance. It's also sent out as part of the liaison reports. As part of the Rockford Region Rebounding, there were 3 priority work groups that put together their guidance documents after reviewing both the DCEO and as well as what we can do regionally. And we worked with the elected officials as well about permitting and things like that for areas that the health department does not have under municipal kinds of permits, such as outdoor dining and things like that. And so the daycares were one of them, places of worship, as well as bars and restaurants were the 3 that we have groups on. You'll be seeing some additional guidance coming out this week, but do make sure that you're looking at those liaison reports that go out at the end of the week, because we do put those out there for everyone to take a look at.
Thank you, Dr. Martell. Mr. Fellers, were you next?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also just like to say I would prefer we not lay this over, as the guidelines are available on the website. They are publicly available. We can certainly review them, and if there are changes that need to be made, there are 16 of 20 board members on this call right now. We could certainly, in a very good and lively discussion, we could certainly make any of those changes or adjustments or discuss this in full on the county board floor. But holding it up here in committee, I don't think makes any sense. We should just move this on forward and review those guidelines between now and the next board meeting, and everyone can make their decision then.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Mr. Haney.
Yeah, thank you. Just real quick, Mr. McDonald, the only thing I would say, the concern I hear from Mr. Booker and others, the concern is shared, actually. I wish that restaurants were opened up to a percentage, like 25 or 33%, as Mr. McDonald indicated. We advocated for that. The health department advocated for that. But that is right now, because of an executive order, one I don't 100% agree with. Those are what we're playing by. The choice isn't connected to this document. It's really, we don't like the percentage that restaurants could be open. I don't know what we could do about that, because that is in the form of an executive order. And I don't, the power of the health department doesn't, a lot of it comes from the state. So I guess I'm concerned that we agree on some of the problem. I don't like the box store thing either, Mr. Booker. I just don't know that the solution is this. But I agree with the concern. I think you're right, actually. So anyway, thank you.
So we've got a motion to lay over, seconded by Mr. Booker. Is there any other discussion on the motion to lay over? Because I did hear some dissent earlier, we'll do a roll call on the motion to lay over. Ms. Crosby,
No.
Mr. Butita, I'm sorry, Mr. Butita?
No.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hoffman,
No.
Ms. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
No.
Mr. Arena.
Yes.
Ms. Coral. Ms. Coral, have you a vote for layover?
No, I don't want it laid over.
Mr. Fellers,
No.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
and I am also a yes. So it's 6-4, motion layover fails. So the item is back in front of us. Is there any other discussion on the ordinance? And again, I intend on voting no. I share a lot of the same concerns. It's very open-ended. There's no end to it. It makes me worried. It's not clearly defined. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak to it before we take the vote? Seeing none, we'll take the vote for ordinance amending Chapter 50 of the County Code ordinances related to food establishment operations during COVID-19 pandemic.
In California, players joining to voice their message. Protesters say
Mr. Butita.
like these with riots.
Yes.
They say they believe change is possible.
Mr. Hoffman.
Much more of these protests and the response from Washington later.
What'd you say, Joe? I didn't see it.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Red.
I'm sorry, you were breaking up. What are we voting on?
We're voting on the ordinance to amend Chapter 50.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado.
Yes.
Mr. Arena.
So again, we're here on East State Street, coming up to multiple.
Did you get that? No.
Mr. Westcott, I think, is still not with us. Ms. Coral?
Going to block off some of the streets. So this is what's happening right now here on the east side of Frankfurt.
Hey, Mr. Booker, can you mute your, whatever you got there?
Yeah, guys, anyone that's not speaking, please mute because you make it so that no one else can hear.
Miss Red needs to mute.
Thank you, sir.
I
And
am
Mr.
muted.
Booker's in.
No, you're not.
Paul, Angie Goro, what was your vote? Yes or no, ma'am? Ms.
Say
Goro?
that again. Would you say that again, please?
Do you vote for or against the ordinance?
I vote for the ordinance.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
No.
Ms. Crosby?
Yes.
And I am also a no. So the motion passes. 7 yes and 3 no, ordinance passes. We'll move on to item F, resolution extending proclamation declaring County Winnebago, Illinois, a disaster area for coronavirus response. This is the third extension. Can I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Booker, second by Mr. Hoffman. The item is now before us. Is there any discussion on this? I do have comments as well. Ms. Red, do you have a comment? I see your audio is lit up. Mr. Haney.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McDonald. My only concern with any discussion of not extending the declaration has to do with potential reimbursement of funding. That is not something that's 100%. But I also know if you don't extend the declaration for whatever period of time it's not in effect, you're not as eligible for reimbursements. I don't know anything past that. I just would hate a situation months from now or weeks from now that we decide something and then realize it costs us money on a reimbursement. Beyond that, I guess that's my main concern at this point when people have brought that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Arena.
Did the governor issue a new disaster declaration, or didn't it expire at the end of May?
I don't know that answer for sure. Does anybody here know that answer for sure?
Chairman Haney, I'm sorry, question to Chairman Haney. Did the governor extend the disaster declaration?
I know the governor issued a new executive order, and I'm not sure on that other part. I was watching more for the executive order. I defer that to Charlotte.
I believe he did. I was just going to check right now, but I believe I saw that.
I've not heard that he did not. I'd assume that he did.
I was looking at them and I saw he extended executive orders, but is the disaster declaration the same thing as an executive order?
Angie Goro, like to speak?
Go ahead, Ms. Corl, while Ms. Leclerc is looking.
Am I correct? This is a federal government situation that we signed because it's the federal government who's the one that's going to be reimbursing me. Am I wrong?
Typically, that is the way things work. You're absolutely right, Ms. Coral. I have my questions or suspicions how much we're going to get, or if we're going to get fully done. But you're right. Typically, the old firefighter in me can tell you from national incident management classes that you have to declare an emergency in order to be considered for reimbursement. So you're right on that portion.
Well, then you just said the whole thing. If we don't, just like the chairman said, if we don't renew this, then we can be out of luck. If the time runs out on it and we have not extended it, that means no federal funds will be coming in to back us up. Thank you.
And you're right. And I agree with the sensitivity of this. I want to make sure we don't put the taxpayers on the hook for more than what we need to. It's my intention to make a motion to amend this to make it an additional 14 days, which will make it expire June 28th, which will give us 2 more weeks to take a look at what really is going to happen. I don't want to make a knee-jerk reaction and just say, no, we're not going to extend it. But I'm in favor of extending it for another 2 weeks to get us through 2 more board meetings to have a better idea of the impact. Ms. Clark was looking up something for us. I'll go to her first.
Yeah, he did issue one on May 29th.
Thank you, Ms. Leclerc. I see Mr. Fellers. You're next.
You know, look, guys, I hear a lot of, frustration at the way things are coming down from the governor's office and from Springfield, and the lack of action by the General Assembly here. But as much as I think we all don't like this. We're cogs in this. Not extending this there's no benefit to it, right? I mean, not extending this, there's absolutely no benefit to us not extending it. Whereas when we do extend it, it makes us eligible for federal funding. If we do it for 14 days, we do it for 30 days. We do it for 30 days so it lines up with the governor's extension of the pandemic declaration in his executive order. But at this point, guys, we're just kind of cogs in the wheel. We can't stop anything that comes out of Springfield in this case. We can't make our own rules. We can't go rogue. We've just got to make sure that we're in position to get reimbursed for everything that we're spending. And the more time we spend kind of over this every 4 weeks, there's no benefit to not extending this. There's no benefit at all, right? It only hurts us.
Mr. Chairman?
We'll go to Ms. Coral and then Mr. Arena.
Mr. Chairman, you're talking about, you say you don't want it to be any more cost to the taxpayer. We don't extend this at least a month or more. it is going to be a cost to the taxpayer because they aren't going, we aren't, as a county, aren't going to get reimbursed for anything, which then lays back onto the taxpayer. So this is actually a protection for the taxpayer as well as the county. I would really give this some hard thought before anyone decides to only lay it over for a week. Do the whole thing, lay it over for a month or 2 months so that our backside is covered. We cannot afford not to have our backside covered. It's very important at this time since we have no money to begin with. And we're going to be then taxing the taxpayer for what happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coral. I'll speak to that briefly. Any costs that we have incurred up to this point under the emergency declaration will be recovered. So this current declaration ends June 14th. So as of now, any costs we've incurred up until June 14th will be covered. The question is how much longer to extend it. Mr. Haney.
Yeah, just want to clarify something with Charlotte. Because as the county, we have a lot of other public entities who are also keeping tally of expenses related to the COVID response. If we fail to extend, does that affect directly our other like municipal partners who are doing similar accounting work we are and tallying this up? My point is, as the county, we're the only ones who can extend a declaration. If we don't, does that affect their ability to recoup funds?
Quite honestly, Chairman, I don't know the answer to that question. It could, but I don't
Because
know.
we are the only county government has the authority to extend a declaration, not a municipality. As far as I know, if it turns out I'm wrong, guys, I see Mr. McDonald down and said, yes, I think that is correct. My
That
point
is true.
is we make this decision and if somehow there's an issue, and I'm not saying there will be, to Mr. McDonald's point, we could in fact not impact our ability to collect funds, but we could affect everybody else's. And in some cases, they're accumulating fund costs at the same rate or more than we are, for whatever that's worth.
Sure. And I appreciate your comments. That's why I'm not looking to kill this. That's why I'm looking to go 14 days so we can take a look to make sure that we are going to get a benefit out of this. I see Mr. Arena with your hand up, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Haney, after June 14th, what do you expect we will still be spending money on? Give us some examples of what the things are that we're spending money for currently.
Well, I don't, right now, the majority of the money, things have slowed down on the PPE side, but that's assuming things don't pick back up on the infection side or on the virus side. But I think a lot of that money that we have invested will get us a lot of the way through the summer, so that has slowed down. There are associated costs. I can't speak for the health department, but obviously they're under the larger umbrella of an emergency declaration. I can't speak. They are the ones doing a lot of the actual a lot of the outside of the emergency operations center, a lot of the work around this and incurring costs. I defer to Dr. Martell on that. But I mean, there are costs of having the operations center open. The main one is PPE, but I guess my thing is not knowing what all may come. I don't exactly know what's around the corner because we don't know how reopening all that we have is going to go the next month. We're going to learn a lot as we have been over the next 2 to 4 weeks based on this new phase. So I'm not trying to be vague. I'm just saying a lot of the money we've spent on PPE probably will carry us a little bit unless there's a spike, and I can't control that. I don't know about that. I defer to Sandy on that.
Mr. Arena, follow up?
So my concern with this is right in line with Chairman Haney said. Throughout this whole process, we get vague answers. We're not involved in any decision-making. The decisions are made in a way that is not transparent to me. And so I'm uncomfortable just continuing to extend it under this like threat that things are just going to fall apart if we don't. I mean, whoever's been involved with the decision-making process could do a better job of educating all of us on what's going on. You've just said that we We have PPE. Mr. McDonald's suggestion seems to make sense to me. We extend it for a couple weeks, see where we're at. We don't need to keep extending it out 45 days every time. Eventually this has to end. So that's fine.
Mr. Arena, on a follow-up, I don't control when there's a vaccine or a treatment. If I could, as chairman, control when this will come to an end, I'd be in a lot better position than chairman of the Winnebago County Board. And I pray we have it sooner rather than later. But what I hear is people are concerned about the fall. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think it would be a bad idea for anything to lapse.
May I speak again?
One moment, Ms. Coral. I'm going to go to Mr. Fellers, Dr. Martell, and I'll be back to you, Ms. Coral. Mr. Fellers.
Chairman, I'm going to ask you a question. I know you live on the river. Do you have flood insurance?
My property does not require me to have flood insurance, ma'am.
If you did have to have flood insurance, would you say, well, I haven't had a flood for 10 years, why don't I drop my insurance? This is the same thing. This is something that we should extend this as far out as we can. Sorry, Paul, but we don't know. With all these people out there marching right now, and everybody in parks all together, you can almost count on we're going to have another problem of this spiking out. And it's going to come sooner than you think. And then at the last minute, you're going to say, oh, we need to do this. Oh, no, we'll leave it order. I don't care if it's a court order or not. My question is, when you have insurance on your house.
You weren't recognized.
I sure was by the chairman.
Angie, you're out of order.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
I did say we're going to go to Mr. Fellers, Dr. Martell, and then yourself, ma'am.
Mrs. Girl can finish. I'll yield my time to her.
I'm finished because I'm not dropping the insurance on my house because it's never caught fire. It can tomorrow. And that's just the way we're sitting on a fire right now. We don't know if the coals are still hot or if they're burning out. We need to extend this. Thank you.
And you're exactly right. That's why I'm not endorsing getting rid of it altogether. I'm endorsing shortening the length of the item before us. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, look, I mean, I'm with this girl. I don't understand why shortening the length here. If we don't, let's just say we don't pass this, or in 14 days, we decide not to pass this. It's not as if the crisis of the pandemic is all of a sudden over. It isn't as if, the governor's executive orders no longer apply to us. It isn't as if like everything just kind of goes away and goes back to normal, right? All we're doing is we're saying, well, I guess we're not in a state of emergency, and therefore we don't apply for, we don't get any federal emergency management funds, right? I mean, we don't need to look at it in 14 days. We don't need to look at it in 30 days. If the state extends the declaration of emergency another 30 days, we go along with it because that's how we get paid money back. Just by us saying, we're not going to declare an emergency doesn't make this just go away. Right? Everything stays the same.
I don't disagree with your point. I don't believe there's any one guarantee that we're going to get reimbursed for all of our costs, for one thing. I've got Dr. Martell, and then after that, I want to go to Mr. Chapman, because during our declaration of emergency, it also activates different spending things. And with our sales tax revenue being what they are, with the current events in Winnebago County and the country, our costs, I see Jaime kind of looking down because he doesn't even want to talk about the budget right now. That's one of my concerns, is to make sure we do have a good hold on our spending. So I'll go to Dr. Martell first, and I'll go back to Mr. Chapman.
Well, I want to come back. This is a pandemic of 100 years, right? Let's be clear about this. We are in some unprecedented times of which we don't have great modeling. We were pretty close on target at this health department of telling you when your peak infections were going to be. But I've got to be honest with you, as we begin to roll out and people go out into the community, we are going to begin to see the level of potential illness and sickness impacting your workforce, where you have different policies that have to go into place. You have to pay your employees during this time frame before the federal government kicks in. And so while I understand that right now we're kind of in a very positive place, we've been able to reopen into phase 3. We have had really declining positivity rates, which is awesome. But I can tell you within 2 days of the courts even in operation, we've had some hiccups related to people coming in. So be clear that to Angie's point, it's really not, at this point, you're not spending. You can still put different kinds of controls on authorizing expenditures, which you should. I mean, I take all mine to the Board of Health as well. Any expenditures I'm related to this. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to recoup these. And if you fail to then have this in place at the time you're making those expenditures, it's not like you can go back and repurchase your emergency declaration. So be thoughtful about this. And are you available are you wanting to relook at this extension of really at this point? You do want to meet and obviously approve your expenditures, which I think is good governance to begin with. But this simply then says we're in a state where we are going to be authorized to submit for federal reimbursement.
I was contacted today by a PPE supplier of the county that through whatever hiccups, I guess so far there's an issue with the bill. But the point is we've got thousands of N95 masks sitting there that we haven't even touched yet. So I'm curious, what else do we still need to purchase above and beyond those? Mr. Arena.
Dr. Martell raised an interesting point about the expenditures going before her board. Have all of our expenditures been pre-approved going through finance, or has money been, because we're acting under the disaster declaration, has money been spent without this board's approval?
Mr. Chapman, can you answer that?
Mr. Chapman or Mr. Felgate?
Yeah, normally, expenditures that go through the EOC Center for PPE and so on. The approval process is through actually my office. I sign off on all those bills. I believe we've reported back to the board over the last couple of months the expenditures that we have made in the EOC as for not only the PPE but also other expenses, interpreters, additional phone lines, etc. So, we've kept track of what expenditures we have. We kept it separate in a separate fund so we can utilize that to submit reimbursement. Other departments that have spent money separately for PPE and so on that hasn't gone through the EOC. Those expenses are charged to their individual budgets and in a separate line item so we can recover those also. So, there is an approval process similar to all the other bills that we pay by a designated supervisor. And for that, the EOC, the designated supervisor is myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chapman. Ms. Crosby.
I'd like to call the question.
We've got a motion to call the question. Before we go through all the voting, is there anybody that has got a problem with it? Can we just quickly, Mr. Arena?
What is the question? Is this on, are we voting on your motion or are we voting on the original question?
We're voting on calling the question.
But what is the question we're calling?
Right. Mr. Arena is asking if I made the formal motion to amend. And I never did make the formal motion to amend, nor did I get a second. So the calling the question would be on as written.
So do we have a second? Okay.
By Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Fellers for calling the question. Is there anybody opposed to calling the question? Seeing none, we'll mark a yes vote for everybody is in favor of calling the question. That brings us back to our original resolution extending proclamation declaring County Winnebago, Illinois a disaster area for the coronavirus response. Is there anyone who does not support the resolution? I see Mr. Arena. Is there anyone else or shall I do a roll call? Mr. Booker? I'll do a roll call right quick, just so we can make sure we have everything clear. Mr. Hoffman.
Yes.
Ms. Red.
Yes.
Mr. Salgado,
Yes.
Mr. Arena,
No.
Mr. Westcott join us yet? I don't think he did. Ms. Coral, Ms. Coral,
Yes.
thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fellers,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
No.
Ms. Crosby,
Yes.
Donald.
I don't know. I was looking down right and I got everything all crazy. I apologize. Mr. Butita, what was your vote?
Yes.
And I am also a no. So the motion passes. The ordinance passes. The next item is I don't know. My space bar is doing weird things. I apologize. The next item is proclamation of support to establish guidelines for responsible reopening of Winnebago County. Can I have a motion? Mr. Booker, Ms. Coral, second by Ms. Crosby. The item is before us. Mr. Booker, I believe you brought this forward. Do you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I brought it forward because, as I stated earlier, that I just don't, I haven't trusted the governor on his continuing to extend. And again, as I said forward or before, was that we've got to get our small businesses open. We're moving too slowly with the numbers that we have, and that's in my opinion. And I'm also speaking for the citizens of Winnebago County that have contacted me. We also have an overwhelming number of hours from the Sheriff's Department as far as overtime goes during the past 7-8 days. And we need to get our sales tax started up again. So we've got to get that ball rolling again. So that's where I'm coming from. It's just that we need to declare that Winnebago County is not Cook County, and we're not a collar county. We are totally separate from their numbers out there and their responses. And we've got to do something for our citizens, and this is really for our citizens. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wishes? Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to hear from somebody that knows a little bit more what's going on than we're discussing, or what I would like to hear from Dr. Martell. I'd like to hear from the Chairman Haney. That's who I want to hear from. I don't want to hear from people who just want to get the business going because they haven't cleaned that's what you do.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I had Mr. Fellers next and then Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I commend Mr. Booker for this proclamation. I think it's been really well thought out and well written. Again, at the end of the day, it's not our decision. As much as we hate this, these aren't our calls to make. And my fear is that if we approve this, all it does is continue to sow confusion, right? We need to be clear with the citizens of Winnebago County what the directive from the Illinois Department of Health is, what the directive from the Winnebago County Health Department is, and be clear and consistent on that. And we shouldn't add any confusion. For whatever proclamation we can make, it's not going to reopen small businesses that are not part of this current phase of reopening. Whatever proclamation we make, it's not going to reopen, markets, that are currently not open. It's not going to bring back the Winnebago County Fair or the Boone County Fair, or any of these things. We need to make sure that we're not sowing any additional confusion. right? This is already challenging on everyone. I mean, we're all, some of us stuck inside. Look at me. I've been stuck inside for 3 months. I'm surprised I'm not falling apart yet. In a clear voice that, you know, these are what the executive orders are. This is what the law says. This is what we've got to follow. And I just don't want to add any more confusion to that. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments, Mr. Fellers. I respectfully disagree. I don't fall in line with the way of the thinking of the governor. I think we'll agree to disagree on that. Mr. Arena next, and then follow up with Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first to comment on Mr. Feller's comments, I don't know that we are without choices. I believe Madison County chose to open up and not follow the guidance of the state. And my concern with this proclamation is it appears to me to state that we will be following whatever the state dictates. And I think that's contrary to Mr. Booker's intent as he described it. So I do not support it the way it is now because I disagree with decisions that were made at the state level in particular. And as Mr. Booker said before, we mismanaged the closures of businesses, allowing people to congregate in grocery stores and big box stores in a way that was unsafe, and closing small businesses that could have operated safely. Those are the types of things I think we need to take control of and have a little bit more, apply some common sense locally. And so to this, I think we need to make some edits before we move forward if we're trying to get a little bit more control over our own destiny. Thank you.
I agree with you, Mr. Arena. I don't think this is the final document we want to approve. And with Mr. Booker, I mean, no offense, but I make a motion to lay it over so we can amend it. Can I have a second to lay it over? Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Arena. Is there any discussion to the motion to lay over?
This is the state's attorney. I'd like to just address the last comment about Madison County. What you need to know is Madison County has a different makeup with their county health department. I believe it's part of their county board. So I just wanted to just add that because there was a comment about what Madison County had.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. And how did that come about? How do they fall under the county board and ours does not? What's the change there?
I can respond to that.
Okay, well, Dr. Martell, and then we'll go to Chairman Haney.
You are a referendum health department. The voters of Winnebago County voted to have a health department and a board of health. Others may operate under a resolution and they function under the county board. So for instance, county is a resolution health department, as is Madison County. So in that, the default is the county board then is the board of health.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Martell. Mr. Haney, did you still have something to add?
That's what I was going to say. Thank you.
Excellent. So we've got, it's been motion and several seconds to lay over. Is there any other discussion on laying this over? Is there anybody who's opposed to laying this over? We will then mark a yes vote for all members present. Thank you. Moving on, we have other matters. Does anybody else have other matters for this evening? Mr. Salgado and then Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Dr. Martell. She's on the line here, and so my question is, how do we? If you could explain a little bit with the phases with the state. We are considered to be in stage 3 right now, and we're opening up some of the businesses and directed from the state. And so my question is, what metrics are being used to determine what stage we are? Are we in the trend to potentially move into stage 4 based on the data that we currently have? How is that made, that determination to stage 4? Because I think the confusion here is, from my standpoint, is there wasn't a lot of guidelines going through and information that kind of put things to rest in a sense, like we need to start opening big box versus small box, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd just like to get some information on that and see if there's information out there that you guys are deliberating and disseminating across the board. I know Mr. Paul Arena has been very vocal about individuals making particular decisions on like the groups that we currently have, which I think it's really good to have the groups, but I think it gets lost in translation based on what the guidelines are, how people can, essentially agree or disagree to those and, make decisions on that. So I think we're in the right path. As Dr. Martell kind of has mentioned, this is something unprecedented that hasn't happened in a while. So there's certain, obviously some issues there, the preparedness for it on that aspect of it. But I'd like to get some information from Dr. Martell on the different stages and what metrics are being decided and what the trend is currently looking at, where we think that potentially in the next month or so, based on the status quo. I know things can change weekly, daily, whatever, monthly, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd just like to get that information and what we're looking to do. And then what does that stage 4 looks like, going into that direction. And I know the information, I believe, is out there. They put a list of bullet points of different things that are out there. But from our perspective, locally here, how that and how the health department's moving forward on that. Thank you.
So first of all, let's talk about what the public health metrics are, because we put those out in the daily report so you can look at them every day. You should be receiving them. If you don't receive them, you can also go to the website. We post them every day. So first of all, we're looking at what we call the positivity rate. It's not just total number of positive cases, because I think people say, well, if more people get tested, more people will be positive. That's, you'll have more cases. So the positivity rate for this phase, the ideal was to get it below 20%. We are now, if you were to look at this, we just talked about this today at our press briefing, is we're hovering around 10%. So that means 1 out of 10 tests submitted are positive for COVID-19. One of the other metrics that's looked at is when you start to take a look at is your hospital capacities. Now we take that out of a resource called what they call EM Resource Board that they're required to submit every day that tells how many beds they have in med-surg and how many of the ICU beds they have. So essentially as we reopen, and this is, I don't mean to make this, essentially they have capacity for us if we need hospitalization. That's really what this is meaning. As we get infected, as we get sick. Right? So the hospitals are moving in that direction. We have capacity. They are required at this point, based on governance and things through the CMS as well, to maintain at least 14% of their capacity should they need that. We are nowhere near that point, so they're able to maintain and keep up pace with both elective procedures, or what we call essential procedures that were postponed, as well as care for COVID during all of this, because we are going to be out there for about 12 to 18 months based on the analytics. The other part that you're looking at is what we've been posting is really taking a look at that trend about how many people are coming in the emergency department. So you see that on the backside, it's called the emergency department admissions for COVID-like illness. So we monitor that. We do not, death rate is not included as part of one of the metrics to reopen. So people that are calling about this, that is not one of the metrics. Outbreaks are not one of the other metrics. Clearly we have our concerns about are the locations of concern. And as more people get out, that's the workforce that's going to be coming back in. So while I understand some PPE may not be in use, I would hope that you're going to make sure there's adequate stock. We have not requested, we turned over all of our PPE to the community for use. So whether it was long-term care, whether it was a congregate setting at Goldie Floberg or some of our other locations, we made sure they had everything they needed. So again, those are the metrics we look at. Then we have the working groups that are taking a look at the DCEO guidance. That some of it, I'll be honest, for instance, I'm going to tell one that we had to deal with this week, was a ceramic studio. Now, there is no one guidance document that talks about a ceramic studio, right? So you have to go and take a look at what procedures can you put in place to get them to be able to open. And so working with them, we developed, kind of a procedure for them to be able to, open up their business. We are working currently, for instance, with the Rockford Rivets about what does that look like, because that's a much bigger, as we know, stadium. So right now, gatherings of 10. Phase, 4 looks like gatherings of 50. But again, kind of saying, well, that's a unique venue, right? It's a huge outdoor seating facility. But in looking at how they've put together their seating arrangements, we're proposing it and pulling that through to the, DCEO and saying, how are other, we're going to call them, baseball leagues preparing to open during phase 4, with the idea being that phase 4 is looking like, based on 2 incubation periods from the last time, would be June 26th. So ahead of, I keep hearing July 4th, but it'd be ahead of that. But again, we have to be thoughtful about this, because as we go rolling through, we want to see, does that number change? Is the percent positivity increase? At our high, when we predicted our peak, 17% of the population was that 70% of all tests that were submitted for this region were positive. And I'll be honest with you, while we don't want to be a Chicago, many of them don't want to be us. In the region. We are kind of out there in that regard. So we put that on the daily report so the population knows where we're moving and what. We are currently working with development of what we call community standards. So we look at the guidance, we say, some of it's, again, guidance, some of it is not as clear as it needs to be. So that's the working groups that put together. For instance, we know that the church guidance came out that allows larger groups of 100, right, within certain space based on their capacity. So then that had a trickle down effect to cemeteries and funeral homes. So we worked with them to develop what could pass, how they could manage that. And so looking at how we do that, but I'll be honest, we have working groups dealing with all of this, whether it's summer camps that we put out the guidance at the end of the week to begin to roll out daycares and summer programming. Again, looking at things like the Laurent House, which is not really a museum. Do you consider it more like a real estate, right? Because it's going to have the same look and feel. So again, where we can, and where we can apply and where we can put together, what we found is our businesses have been very proactive in trying to look not only at what they currently can do, but how do they move forward to the next phase? What's that going to look like? And so we are pulling that documents together and pushing it forward, and also really trying to guide and direct some of it at the state level as well. We had proposed, I think the chairman shared that. Because many of our facilities did not have open dining, right? Open air dining. It was more of that downtown Rockford kind of scenario that had the outdoor. We pushed for indoor. Again, sometimes those tools are taken out. And at that point, so we work with our municipalities, make the outdoor dining as accessible to everyone as possible. We cannot, again, the big box have limits on their capacity as well. I don't know if you've been into a big box. Yes, the parking lots, but how many of you have gone down the one-way aisles that are required and what they put out in those guidance? And I understand, Mr. Booker, this is difficult. It has not been pleasant for any of us. And I want to be clear with you that this health department, we have not, in terms of overtime, we have kept that to our minimum, but we have been in command for this. And we continue, as you would guess, since the end of January. So understand, every time we report a case, when you see those numbers, every single one of them has had a phone call and a follow-up to clear them either to return to their work, to be able to give them guidance in their employment. And if it's a case and an identified someone who's tested positive, we have to work with all of the household contacts. And that may include housing them. Because if you are in an apartment of 2 rooms, you cannot isolate in your apartment. So understand, this is not what, as I say to people, this is not the pandemic I would have planned for or had or wanted, but it is what we have, and we have to be judicious. We have to be logical about it. We have to let science guide us. And our working groups have provided us a great deal of information about how to be able to propose it moving forward. Today, I was on a call with the Rockford Area Business and Convention Bureau as we looked about how do we got the clean hands, open door, which is the confidence that's needed in both the consumer, which is the public. So simply opening it doesn't mean the public's going to come. Remember, there's a lot of studies out there that say you have to make sure that you're communicating it, as well as the workforce. The workforce has to be able to return as well. So we are dealing with everything from large employers that are food manufacturers and processors to our smaller employer businesses. So to your point, we're putting out that communication. We're working with all of the various groups in an attempt to be able to move guidance as quickly as we can to get to places where we can safely and sustainably reopen.
If I may, as a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Martell, I know you mentioned about all these metrics, which I thank you for explaining that again. But my question really comes into who makes the final determination from one stage to the other? Does the state look at that information, say, yep, the county is within that 20%, that 10%, whatever it is, that we're saying
Sure.
that the incubation period, whatever the case may be, you know, who is the final person to say, hey, is it the health department that says, hey, we are at these metrics, you know, we can move on to the next stage? You know, that's really, I think, you know, I'd like that explanation, because
Sure.
I'm one of those individuals that don't know.
So we also put out the Restore Illinois plan, and we are divided into regions, and we are not included in the Chicago region. We are considered the North Central region. So it includes most of what we would consider as our state line health, you know, systems, and all the way far down to south, we include Peoria. And so as a region, they look at our metrics in total. And at that point, the Illinois Department of Public Health determines whether or not we can move to the next phase. So again, they're looking at this as a public health metric driven approach. It is not, again, we understand the implications for the economics. It's very concerning. But at any point, should we have to close down businesses again? And that's a huge concern for all of us as we worked with many of our establishments. I'm going to tell you, the food establishments were very concerned about if they had to shut down again. The amount that they had to do the last time was sudden. It was a hard stop. We would say that was not, you know, we would not want to plan for that. It's very disruptive to a business. So this is why we want to move forward in a way that really allows us to make sure that we are able to open safely and sustainably over the long haul. And so again, state determines whether or not as a region we're able to move forward on the metric.
Thank you.
Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. I think our metrics and our work teams should get up with the state of Georgia, who's been open for 2.5 months now, and Wisconsin. Perhaps we better figure out what Georgia's doing right. Obviously, they've been open for 2 months, 10 weeks. There's no spike or anything that we're aware of. Otherwise, it would be making national news. And I know that Illinois tax dollars are going to Wisconsin right now. I know I've been going there, and I'll be going there until we can be where I can sit down at a restaurant and have a dinner. I'll continue to go to Wisconsin. So we better figure out what they're doing right and why we're so far behind. And I know we got other business to move on to, so I'll keep it short. Thank you.
Well, I would like to respond to that. Wisconsin is having a surge in cases at present. I'm not, obviously we keep a look at what's going on the state line. We also saw one of the greatest like European experience was the country of Sweden and its neighbors. And they now indicate that that was not the metric that they should have been going for. They have higher death rates and higher case rates than any of the other Scandinavian countries around it. So I understand the frustration. I'm just as frustrated as all of you. I wish, as I would say, I wish this wasn't the pandemic that we got. Certainly the pandemics and all the flu that we ever thought we would have some kind of an antiviral medication and a vaccine quick. But that's not what we've got. And so all of us have the responsibility to protect the health and safety and life and livelihood. I agree. So we are working with our business community, get them open in a safe, sustainable way. And I have to say, I commend them. They've worked hard. They've given us ideas. We've pushed those ideas up as quickly as we can to see if we can't be able to influence that at different levels. So again, I wish it was different, but this is where we are dealing with. And at the end of the day, yes, we've got to restore our economic system, and we have to maintain the health of our citizens. We should not lose any more.
I just have to ask Dr. Martell, Sweden is the one country in the world that did absolutely nothing, and now they're seeing the consequences of that. We've been, the United States, the state of Illinois, and the county of Winnebago, we have been making appropriate steps. I think we have made good choices. I think, I know you and I have spoken before. I think our opening should be based on hospital capacity. I think we should continue to relax restrictions and allow people to move forward further and further based on hospital availability. Because as we were told in the beginning of this, if we overflow the hospital capacity for ventilators and ICU beds, and many more people will die. But now that we've done that, and it seems like we've got some control or a throttle, if you will, I think we're on the better side of that than Sweden. I don't know that Sweden is a fair comparison.
Well, again, that was one of the countries that it was the one that decided they were going to go for herd immunity, like people get infected and how would it play out. I think the other concern you have is as we look at health equity concerns and issues in communities of, concern, I think we have to be thoughtful about that because people simply getting sick and staying out of the hospital may mean they become unemployed. If those of you remember, RMTD, our mass transit system, had to shut down routes because of their workforce becoming ill with COVID-19. Those individuals were not hospitalized, but they could not report for work due to the infection rate. And that is a huge concern for the long-term care and congregate facilities. So I understand the hospital capacity issues and I can appreciate that. And we clearly are meeting that metric. But I think any of you who are as an employer, I have to worry the same thing. If my critical workforce is impacted by illness, which is part of this, issue, they are out for a minimum of 10 days and any household context to a case are out for a minimum of 14 days. So you and I have had that conversation, so we know how that impacts the workforce.
Sure. It just, during this meeting, I still monitor the the fire department frequencies. There's been a suicide in the county during this meeting today. That's what I'm worried about. I understand that we're protecting people, I understand, but it's the emotional health of everybody who's still healthy that have lost their jobs because of the percentage of people who can't work. Again, there was another suicide during this meeting, and those are also the people that I'm concerned with.
And we are monitoring both the opioid overdose rates as well as suicide and unintentional death rate as well. I mean, clearly, we are continuing to monitor that as we map it across other death rates. Any loss of life prematurely is something that we as a community should mourn.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has anything to add for this evening's portion? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Salgado, seconded by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Arena. Is there anybody opposed?
There was one other. I'm sorry.
Okay.
My apologies. I had personnel from the Sheriff's Department just to speak a little bit about. I know everybody. This went on longer than I thought. Does anyone have any questions about use of force? I've got Chief Deputy Saganek online. I've got Deputy Chief Gasparini online. I've got a person from our training division in regards to the Sheriff's Department's use of force.
I'd say let them speak.
Yeah. There has been a motion, a second. If it pleases the committee, I would like to hear from the Sheriff's Department, if that's okay.
I retake my motion off the table.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. Chief Saganek?
Yeah, Mr. McDonald, thanks for having us here. Actually, we have myself and Deputy Chief Gasparini and one of our training officers, Sergeant Franks, on the line. And really, we're here tonight to answer any questions that the committee might have about the use of force, our policy, how we track that, with the sheriff's office. If anybody has any concerns, based on what's happening in the country right now. So, if there are any questions on how we do that, how we have an early warning system for officers that use force multiple times, whatever the questions are, we're here to answer them tonight.
Thank you, Chief. Just real quick, I want to jump in. Has there been any reports of violence yet tonight with tonight's protest?
There have not. And quite frankly, when you look around the country, what's happening with the protests, between the county police department, the city police department, our friends at the state police, the Rockford region, the Winnebago County has fared very well. Other than some incidents this past Saturday night, the last 4 or 5 days have all been very peaceful, the protests, and they've been, heavily policed. We've had a heavy police presence between the three agencies. And we'll continue to do that to make sure that the county's safe, but no acts of violence tonight, and the protests continue to be peaceful in the Rockford area, which every one of our law enforcement agencies support. If people want to protest peacefully, every agency in Whitfield County will support that.
Excellent. I have been monitoring on the radio your guys' traffic, and I'm impressed with the professionalism and you guys allowing the peaceful protesters or demonstrators to get their message across and allow them their space to get that message across. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for you guys. Just real quickly, I know that some of the stores like Target have been closing at different times throughout the day because of potential, protesting that has kind of occurred like in Saturday incident. So the question is, how do you guys communicate with these stores? I know it's their discretion. They set their time or whatever, but I've known that has been some communication with the police departments to essentially make them aware of potentially, and they make their decisions on closures at different times throughout the day. The reason I ask is because I went to Target the other day, and the pharmacy, I had to get a prescription for a relative, and they said that they're closed, the pharmacy was, and so they were closing. So just wanted to see how the communication with that, and how do you guys collaborate with that? If you guys could maybe shed some light on that, because it's kind of interesting times right now.
Yeah, it's you know what, you're right. It's actually very interesting times, and quite frankly, there has been a lot of collaboration between the different law enforcement agencies. And for instance, on Tuesday nights, we opened up a second emergency operations center, which included the incident command from all the different agencies. So we're making sure that there's communication, that all the law enforcement agencies in the county are on the same page. When you talk in terms of big box stores, it's pretty simple. It's direct communication. We will have a message, and we'll send our officers out with that message. Phone calls directly. The good news is that between most of the stores and retail centers in our community, there's direct communication between the police that's been going on for a long time. So those relationships are established, and so it's just a phone call to the manager, to whoever, saying, hey, this is what's going on tonight, and this might be on the stores that close early. It might be in your best interest to close early tonight. So that's what it's really, direct communication based on relationships that have been established for a long time.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Saganik, I have two questions. First, is there any circumstance under the Sheriff's Department policy where an individual who's cuffed can have force exerted to them? Like what we witnessed in Minnesota, I assume is against our policy, but is there to any extent that, you can take a forceful act against an individual who's already cuffed? And my second question is, the body camera systems that we had purchased, has that been able to be implemented fully yet? Or to what extent do the officers in the field have body cameras? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll address this one at a time. The first question is, as I understand, is if someone is in cuffs, can force be used against them? And that's really a case-by-case incident. There are times when someone who's cuffed who will continue to kick, fight, spit, and really kind of the spitting is something that people do when they're cuffed, right? So a use of force might be, and this would be considered use of force, but to put something over their face so they can't spit at people, right? You put a hood over their face so they can't spit, but that's considered force. So, to answer your question, it's plausible, but under our policy, is it likely? No. And to get your second point, when you talk about the body cameras, so we have implemented the tasers, the car cameras, and the body cameras in that order. The COVID has messed up.
I'm hoping he catches up. We'll give him a second.
We would have rolled out the body cameras second. However, we were trying to get a grant to pay for the in-car cameras, the Axon in-car cameras. So we set a deadline to get those out. As it turned out, we were unable to apply for that grant, but every car right now has an Axon camera in it, and we will roll out and have the Axon body cameras in place over the next 14 days. So that was our timeline. Sergeants and lieutenants are currently wearing the body cameras. During some of the protests this week, I was wearing a body camera. Deputy Chief Barcelona was wearing a body camera. So they're out there. We are using them, but department-wide, they will be, everyone will be wearing them in the next 2 weeks.
Chief, again, I got like a very direct question. Are we allowing our deputies to use their knee on the neck of anybody in restraints?
So, I mean, again, you talk about what happened there. Putting a, and I don't want to get into what happened with George Floyd, right? I don't want to talk about the details of that, but putting your neck or doing a neck restraint or a chokehold is not appropriate. On the call, I should have Sergeant Bryce Franks, and he is one of the people that actually trains our officers, and maybe he can talk a little bit more about that. Bryce, are you on the call?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So yeah, in regards to the actual training of physical restraint, guys will start with they get about 40 hours of academy training on restraint when they're down at the police academy. That will include prone restraints. That training on prone restraint will include. We use like a shin pin where they would pin somebody down with the shin, not with the point of the knee, and certainly not on the neck. One of the things that there is stressed to them at the academy, I did speak to the academy director on this today. One of the things that is stressed at the academy, and we stress here in our own agency training as well, is as soon as restraint has been achieved and it's safe to do so, we need to get this person onto their side or sitting up in what we call a recovery position, which makes breathing easier. And we also instruct all our officers in training, officers and deputies in training, to inquire of whether or not the person that they're dealing with needs any medical attention or would like any medical attention.
Thank you very much. I think I saw a couple of Chairman Haney.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. So Chief Zaganik, I was just going to mention, I don't know its title, but Officer Del Pra was in the paper the other day, and he was absolutely in the middle of the protest. And I've heard from a lot of different community folks, he helped diffuse what was a pretty escalated situation. So please pass along our thanks and my thanks for his professionalism under very difficult circumstances. So two things. One, going forward with the Public Safety Committee or the board or whatever, I think it would be good, because I don't think this conversation's going away. I don't think it's going to be a couple-day protest. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion over time around the culture of policing. I think there's a lot of good things going on in your department, of course, but if there was a way to overview to the board your early warning system, use of force, your diversity numbers, and I guess updating the board on a regular basis, not just once, not because there's issues going on right now and it's a topical conversation, maybe quarterly. I don't know what the right interval, maybe it's twice a year, maybe it's once a year, maybe it's quarterly, I don't know. But just getting in a pattern with this committee, that'd be important too. DuPage County did a good job with their sheriff's department during the COVID thing, where the health department was reporting out, their numbers related to cases and hospitalization. Have you seen any changes in your numbers related to, and it's not a now, we don't have to get deep into it, but if you see things, could you pass that along to the board? An increase in violence, increase in anything that you keep data points on during this COVID time, because that's not an unimportant set of data points as well.
Sure. There's a lot of information there, Chairman. But I will tell you this: as far as use of force stuff goes, we are willing to be completely transparent. As I mentioned, we have an early warning system in place. Every use of force is reviewed by a supervisor, then secondarily reviewed by our training officers. As we roll out the body cameras, they are a phenomenal tool. as far as use of force goes and the ability to track use of force. Everyone will be able to be reviewed. It really, at times we can review them frame by frame. We can stop and look at every frame and see to ensure that the officer's actions are appropriate. And we will do that. We also are, as far as training goes, we are open to that. If the board would like to come to some of our training and see what we're training on use of force. And keep in mind, I keep saying the term use of force, but when we train use of force, we do a couple of things. We train use of force, but we also train de-escalation. So the board is open to see what we're doing de-escalation wise, use of force wise, and there was a lot of things. So if there's some other questions I didn't answer, just please remind me.
I would go ahead, Chairman. I was going to ask about diversity.
I'm good.
I don't know, Chief Zaganek, if you've been here long enough. I know Chief Gasparini has been involved in attempting to make us a more diverse sheriff's department. And could you kind of maybe just in 90 seconds talk about the steps the sheriff's department's taken or attempted to take to improve the diversity?
Do you want me to answer that? Or was DC Gasparini going to answer that?
And I'm happy with either. I know Gasparini, we've had conversations, the steps that they've taken to try to get the diversity there.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously having a more diverse police department is absolutely one of our goals. We've done things like partnering with some of the criminal justice programs in the area, community colleges, Rock Valley College, Beloit, even the Elgin Community College. We reached out to different diverse communities, but it absolutely is one of our things, or one of our goals is to become a more diverse police department. So we're working on that. It's our goal, and hopefully we'll be able to achieve that. But I want to tell keep in mind that when you're talking about recruiting with qualified minorities, there's a lot of competition for those people because every police department is trying to recruit qualified minorities right now. So we are battling to do that, and we'll continue to do that. But it is not the easiest process because there's a lot of competition.
Thank you, Chief. I see Mr. Grill. Did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question for the chief, and whether or not he wants to comment is totally up to him. But as we've seen on social media, there's a video of Rockford Police Chief Dan O'Shea going around. I think the comments were from last month, but I don't know if the chief has seen these, and if he has, whether or not he agrees with what the police chief says about 16 and 17-year-olds are lost and they just need to go to jail. So whether or not he wants to comment, I'll take it any way he goes. Thanks.
Yeah, I really don't want to get into that, but I will tell you that that currently the sheriff's office and the Rockford Police Department have an outstanding relationship. We support each other. We support what Police Chief O'Shea is trying to accomplish in the city of Rockford, and he also supports what we're trying to accomplish at the sheriff's office. And frankly, I haven't been here for a long time, but from the people I talk to, the relationship between the departments has never been better.
Is there anyone else with questions? We'll go. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. First of all, thank you, Chief Zaganek and Mr. Franks, and just the work you're doing. It's admirable, and our community is in the place that we are relative to others because of the good work that you've done. So I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
I also I have kids that are out with the protesters in Milwaukee, in Rockford, and in the Netherlands. And so their safety is obviously on my heart and mind these days. And I'm also very proud of them, and I'm proud of our protesters because they have obviously a huge hand in whether things escalate or not. So I just wanted to put that out there. Some thoughts germinating in my own mind, in addition to what Chairman Haney said, is just getting feedback, just as he suggested, in terms of those statistics, but also just get a lay of the land from your perspective, and also from the perspective of our people of color in leadership in our community. And that would be from the educational system, from our own county board. You know, we have 3 people of color on our own board to hear their voices, but community leaders. And the questions that I would like answered in a setting where you all get to speak into that is, you know, what is the status of our race relations right now in our community? And this isn't something that I just don't know. And so out of ignorance, I'm asking. And that would be a forum where we would hear the positive things that are happening, hear the success stories, hear the things we're proud of and the things where we're making progress, hear the things that aren't working, hear the things we're concerned about, hear the things that we really think, you know, would be helpful in our community. Because as we're facing just the sign of our times, that would be valuable. But beyond that, from a practical standpoint, this board is going to be making decisions about money in extremely tight times. And having answers to these questions would be empowering to the board and helpful to the board in a time where we have to allocate very scarce resources to understand to the best of our ability, where do we put those resources? Thank you.
Sure, and thank you for those comments. And I just, my response to that would be one, the sheriff's office, as well as the other, you know, the city and the state police, we all support people peacefully protesting, right? We support that. We will keep those protesters safe. When you talk about, you know, in terms of where we at with the community, you know, I come from a place where community-oriented policing, growing relationships and being a part of the community is really the DNA of the police department. I was, you know, early in my career, I was in Elgin. I was called what's a resident police officer. You know, I lived in a neighborhood where you know, I was the only white person, and my job was to make that neighborhood better. You know, and so I understand what it's like, you know, for people in a minority neighborhood, and that is, like, for me, a priority to make sure that we are reaching out to every community in the Rockford region. You know, recently you talk about, you know, what's our relationship like? Well, you know, the 100 organization just recently brought, you know, brought lunch to the police department, to the jail, to our 911 center, and you know, and that's a really positive relationship there. And I know that the sheriff and the sheriff's office is really focused on building those relationships. So it's my strength, it's my background, being a part of that and building relationships in the community, in every community. And so we will continue to do that. I know the sheriff is focused on that, and really that's really, you know, one of the big reasons he brought me here is because of my experience in the past of building relationships with every aspect of the community.
Thank you, Mr.
Did that answer your question, or do you?
Yes, thank you. You know, it's very helpful just to understand where you're coming from. You know, again, this is an area that I need to be educated, and I'm just admitting that. And if I'm the only one, then I'll make all these calls individually. But it might be helpful to the larger board to get this kind of feedback. I want to know what we can do to make our community better. I want to know what's working. I want to know where we're failing, and where are the people on the front lines suggesting that the resources ought to best be deployed.
Sure, and we'd be happy to meet with you on that, and we'd be happy to meet with anyone in the community that has a suggestion on what we could do better. So we're open to that too. We're open to you know, suggestions that will make us a better police department.
Thank you, Chief Sakanik. Is anybody else anything for the combined meeting? I just want to say thank you, guys. I know we're dang near coming up on 2 hours. I really appreciate your patience. I think we covered a lot of great things this evening. I appreciate the Sheriff's Department being here to answer our questions, especially right now. It's very timely. We can get the information that we want right away. And again, thank you. I apologize so dang long, but I think we did great things. Mr. Sagato, once again, do you have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Sagato motions to adjourn, seconded by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Booker, Mr. Arena. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you.
We up next? Mr. Chapman?
Yes, sir.
Finance, all right. I think everybody's here. Mr. McDonald, I think, stepped away from his desk.
I think Mr. Hoffman did too.
Okay. All right, but Mr. Fiducia is on the line. Mr. Schultz is there. Mr. Girl, I think, is still.
I'm here. Yep, I'm here.
All right, so I guess we'll get started so we can get this rolling. So I'd like to call to order the Finance Committee, June 4th, Thursday. It is 7:19. I will do roll call. Myself present, Mr. Hoffman.
Present.
Mr. Girl.
Present.
Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
And Mr. McDonald.
Here.
All right, let the record reflect. We do have a quorum. Mr. Chapman, did anybody sign up for public comment from your knowledge?
No, sir.
All right, then we'll omit public comment and move on to item D, which is our 2020 budget reductions and revenue enhancements. And I will give the floor to Mr. Chapman to talk about the forms. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We sent out with the agenda some documents relating to the 2020 budget. If you remember, we had made some projections probably about a month ago as to where we anticipated being at the end of this current fiscal year, presuming that the issues with the COVID as far as our revenues would be impacted, also the expenditure levels and that. So Mr. Salgado and I had spoken earlier about his concern for maintaining our 25% of our fund balance for as far as expenditures go. And so I did an analysis where I projected out the fund equity that we had come up with for both the general fund and 1% fund. And then we also looked at the total expenditures that we had projected out for both funds, and then came up with what that projected fund balance would be as a percentage of the expenditures. Right now, it's about a little under 23%, 22.77%. If you apply that back to the expenditure level, in order to maintain that 25% at the end of the fiscal year, you're looking at either an expenditure reduction or revenue enhancement of about $1.9 million between now and the end of the year, which is obviously going to be very difficult to attain, I believe. In addition to that, I know over the course of the last 3 or 4 days, the overtime expenditures in the sheriff's department have been very extreme. So that's probably going to add on to this deficit. That's not something that we had budgeted for. And hopefully that number will go down, but your guess is as good as mine. So, but that's going to have an impact on that projected expenditure level through the end of the year. So some of the items that I addressed, I think these are items that we had spoken about earlier, and we've already kind of started the in motions looking at some of these issues. We did send some communication out to the departments as far as the revenues go, in terms of any other additional revenues that we might be able to enhance this particular fiscal year or impact next fiscal year. Obviously, next fiscal year. It's probably not going to be worse than this year, just based on the numbers and based on the impact of everything and that. We're going to try and be meeting with the individual departments to look at their expenditures, what they've spent to date, and what type of reduction possibly we could speak to them about as far as this current fiscal year. The truth of the matter is most of the departments, with the exceptions of the ones I mentioned in the past, are pretty much in line or under budget with what was the original budgets that were put forth. So we're talking about additional expenditure reductions beyond what they've already done. The other issue is, people say, well, you're going to get money from the federal government. Well, that hasn't happened yet. I don't know when it's going to happen and in what form. The discussions that I've heard with the different finance directors around the state organization that Molly's actually been involved with, they're saying that there may be relief coming, but it may not be to replace revenues. It may be for, PPE, things like that. I know the county's going to be getting money from the state, primarily for the PPE end of it, but not necessarily to replace revenues. So the other areas that we've talked about, the hiring freeze, furloughs, et cetera. So we're going to try and make a good faith effort to see what we can come up with and see how close we can get to that number that we were talking about.
Is there any questions for Mr. Chapman before I make a couple comments on it? So, all right, I guess the reason there's a list that Mr. Chapman put out there of potential reductions in revenue enhancements. I think those are good items on the list. Obviously, some of the things are drastic, but I do like the essentially trying to renegotiate some of the utility contracts. That's a piece with procurement, trying to see if we can renegotiate some of those things where we can see cost savings in the thousands, not just 5,000, 10,000, but a little bit more than that to kind of on that aspect of it. But from a board standpoint, I really need from this committee and the board to essentially address our next year's fiscal cycle budget. So keeping that in mind, my perception is that we try to maintain a 25% policy. Two reasons. One, the primary reason is that we have the bond issuance out there, and I know that the bond agency that grades us or whatever has an implication on that. If we violate that policy, then could they negate some of our, downgrade us or whatever, which could put us in a different percentage interest rate, whatever you want to call it, based on the bond rating. So that's one piece of it. And right now we're waiting to pull the trigger with the highway, the $4 million, I believe. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is that, the sooner we try to adjust this, then hopefully next year, we try to recoup some of the revenues. Right now we're saying about 7 million, 6.5. So hopefully, we can address some of it now so it doesn't spill over to next year where it's actually not, say, for example, it's an additional 2 million. Now this year, we essentially make that budget amendment potentially on getting that to the 25%. So we eliminated that $2 million if, whatever it is that if there is a deficit the following year, it doesn't add on to it. And we have to make a drastic cut on that scenario. So those are the two things. And I really need this body to kind of, get consensus in that direction to kind of have Mr. Chapman provide some guidance to departments out there so we can work collaboratively to obviously not just cut up things that we, just because we need to make cuts, but entirely to address some of the areas where potentially we can, like we've been doing with our capital, projects and pushing them out to later years and stuff like that. So that's the piece that, we're trying to figure out. And I think this is a perfect time for us to kind of, that's why we, had the projections, what we think revenue loss is from this COVID, where we think we're going to end up, and what do we need to do to essentially prepare us this year, since we still have time, and then think about, the next fiscal cycle and potentially further on down the road. So this is why, I had conversations with Mr. Chapman on this, and I do like the list that he kind of provided. It gives a sense and idea. I mean, we can scratch some of these things out, but I'd like to get the team under that so we can give support to the administrator, Mr. Chapman, to have those discussions and work with departments to essentially, enact some of these things so we can get down to that $2 million reduction potentially for this year. Is it possible? I don't know. We have to see where we're at. Maybe there is some fat, maybe there isn't, but these are the discussions. Regardless, next year, our next budget cycle, it's even going to get a little bit more difficult for us. And so we're just trying to jump ahead of the process so we can, trying to be effective now. So we wanted to present, Mr. Chapman wanted to present this information because he will be, like he said, he sent out emails to department heads, trying to have these conversations to see what we can, work together and, be a little bit more proactive and think about next year as a whole from that perspective. So I just wanted to shed some light, but I really need from this committee and our board to essentially, give that guidance. If 25%, is that threshold that we want to move forward, then we do so, and then try to get to that 2 million. If not, whatever the case may be. So we're just trying to see if that is possible. So we wanted to shed this light with you guys. So is there any questions regarding the information? Maybe you guys want to take some time, dissect it, whatever, ask more questions, but we just want to illustrate this. All right, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think it's a great list, Steve. Thank you. I mean, obviously your experience shows in the list, and we trust you in terms of your background, your capacity to come up with ideas that will genuinely be helpful. I had a few comments just generally, but I don't know if this is appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a variety of things floating around in my head. One of those is that it really, my sense of it after, coming up on 12 years on the board is that, we have made a lot of adjustments where we can in a variety of departments. And it seems as though there's going to need to be a new way of operating in order for us to come up with significant additional savings. That is, we can't provide services with the techniques, with the operating procedures, with the MO that we've had historically. If we're really going to do that, and I don't know if it's possible, but it seems like it's going to require a reinvention. And that's the territory that we're in. So I guess, Steve, as I'm looking at you, it seems like looking at how others do business, how, others have found efficiencies, how, maybe the use of technology, and I don't know what those items are. And maybe, even as I broach this, it's like, well, we're already the most innovative, we're ahead of the curve in every way possible, but at least spending time on trying to answer the question, is a reinvention something that might be possible for some of these areas, is worthy of at least asking and at least giving consideration. So that's one item. Another item is, I've said a number of times, I really believe that a multi-year financial plan would help us. And my purpose behind that would be to say, we're targeting in a very short window of time this, almost $2 million. But this is not a short-term scenario. We're dealing with a multi-year impact. And I think, honestly, Mr. Chairman, we need to be realistic about what will it take for us to have whatever percent balance 3 years from now. And so if we deal with it on a one-off basis, we may solve today's problem, but still have tomorrow's problem and not be targeting the right solutions. And that's where I know that it's difficult to project more than 1 year, but I do know that, for example, we have contracts that we have signed and that we will likely sign in terms of what the step increases are, as well as what inflation increases will be, and the implications of that in the cash flows, that some of that work can be done. And if we don't have the contract signed yet, we can speculate with some reasonableness based on the past. We know that the step increases have an outsized impact in terms of the salary increase percentages and the dollars that we spend. So the concept in my mind is that we end up saying, not where do we want the fund balance to be at the end of this year or at the end of the next year, but post-pandemic, on the other side of the recession, you know, and I'm at least planting that seed. And if Steve says can't be done, shouldn't be done, won't be done, then we won't do it and we step away from it. But I think we might make better decisions, not just in the short run, but over a multi-year period, if we approach it that way. The third thing is, you know, I look at some of these departments that have already made cuts. I mean, they're living underneath their budget in the current year. And I heard, you know, I'm picking on State's Attorney Height Ross, but in a previous meeting with this group, you know, she said, are those decisions that they made to live with less already going to be taken into account as we make decisions about where the cuts happen now and where they happen in the days ahead? And I just want to say my vote is for not sticking it to the people that have already been responsible. I think we need to be, I mean, what does that say to them going forward? What should they do going forward if, you know, they're rewarded for being responsible by getting additional cuts when they really don't have as much to give up because they've already given it up? And then the last thing I'll say, which, you know, is going to be controversial, forgive me, is that it doesn't matter what budget we pass. If the sheriff doesn't pay any attention to his budget or doesn't regard that as a guideline that he has to live within, which is what he has done over the last number of years, whatever budget we pass, whatever targets we set for fund balance won't make a lick of difference. And that's why I've said to you, Mr. Chairman, you know, that conversation has to happen. And I'll be the first one to celebrate a change of heart and a change of approach in terms of his spending. But this process will literally be window dressing if the largest component of our budget doesn't have constraints and doesn't feel the need to have constraints. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Webster, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to weigh in here. I find so many of my thoughts run parallel with what Mr. Schultz just said, from top to bottom, basically. Starting out with Mr. Chapman, I think that in retrospect, what happened there about us having the former administrator, when she stepped down, that left us in a quandary. Bringing Steve Chapman back in was the best thing that could ever happen for this county in that situation. And I say that because, like Mr. Schultz, I've had this working relationship with Mr. Chapman for many years and never doubted the numbers, the figures that he came up with. He's a what you see, what you get kind of guy there that knows what he's doing and doesn't have to crow about it or boast about it. That's the kind of guy he is. And over all these years, he's kept us in pretty good shape if we listened to him. And so he, you know, I think that what happened over all this and the debate and so forth there, in the long run, we're going to look back on this and say, well, thank goodness we had Steve to guide us through yet one more financial year here. And so for that, thank you, Steve. I hope you do wind up being here for the next, till this is over with. And I also thank Mr. Schultz and Mr. Salgado for being on top of our financial needs, making us aware of where we're at. We don't have an unlimited amount of money to spend for anything. And we do have, as Steve pointed out, we do have some departments that have been good shepherds of the money that we have allocated to them. And some, on the other hand, have gone just the other way. And so the ones that have been good monitors of the money allocated to them, yes, we should be rewarding them by keeping their budgets intact. Those are not the ones we want to start rating for any reason whatsoever. But some we're going to find out there, and I've been down this road before, we're going to find out that some of them we're going to wind up with, as what your report outlined there, Mr. Chapman, there is suggesting that perhaps we might wind up going back down that road again for furloughs, or not replacing openings on different jobs or whatever for 90 days. We're going to wind up with some real, I don't know, I don't want to say innovative ways, because I've seen it happen before. And so this might happen again, and I think people need to get used to this. And this is the new reality once again, you know. So at any rate, I hope that we can work through this, and I hope that we can keep our bond rating up to where it has been, and we can work through this and get another, I don't know, positive end to a budget season here, because this is going to be one of the worst, probably the worst that I've ever seen, I'm sure. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Is there anyone else comments? Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to endorse the 25%. I think that's a terrific benchmark. I think we need to maintain that. We need to be responsible with our money. The other side of that is, nobody here is going to be surprised when I say public safety is the utmost importance. And you guys have heard me say it many, many times. Public safety is number one. Infrastructure is number two for me. I hear the innuendos and the underlying tones of rewarding people who have been able to cut their budget. There are some budgets that we cut to the point where those people couldn't do their job properly. As of this last week, I'm grateful that those departments made the choices they made to help keep the rest of the county and the city safe. I think that was it's a good thing. We're already paying crazy amounts of money for overtime. So we're slightly different on that. I appreciate Mr. Schultz's comments from earlier with your family members who are peacefully protesting in different locations throughout the world, really. And I hope that you feel better or safer the fact that they're being allowed the space to do their protest safely. And I think that's important for us to do in the county as well. I'm grateful that currently we do have the deputies, and working with the city of Rockford and all the other agencies, that we're able to allow everyone to have their voices heard in a peaceful way. Important, very, very important, a peaceful way. So leading into this, I know where a lot of people's heads are and where they want to cut. I don't support that. It's, public safety, infrastructure, those are number one, number two, in my opinion. What I worry about is, like, you read a lot of online and watch the news and look at other media outlets. They're saying maybe 40% of all businesses, all restaurants won't be coming back. So what does that mean when Dr. Martell's office, when their clientele list of restaurants is 40% smaller than what it once was? Maybe that's where we can maintain adequate staffing and adequate safety, but maybe that's a savings there. We need to look across the board. Clerk Gumau's office with the Zoom meetings or the online presence and the other things that we can do that we've learned through this pandemic virtually, maybe we can apply those moving forward from now on, where we don't have to have so many people in the office. Maybe we can accommodate people at home, have a cost savings, cost reduction. We don't need as big of buildings. I think these are going to be important steps that we're going to need to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Ms. Martell, you have the floor.
I want to make sure that Mr. McDonald is clear on this, that we are a tax referendum health department. And so our revenue is based on taxes, and we collect fees for those services. And we have made modifications as needed. Over 50% of our budget comes from grants. So again, be clear on how we are funded. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments on this item? Seeing none. So I just want to echo some of the things that being said. I do appreciate Mr. Schultz touching a little bit. It's been on the process, having multi-year. I mean, that's the trend that I, when I took as chairman the finance, to have more transparency, more, documentation. Mr. Biondo, started with, reporting out, actuals versus estimate, kind of budget versus actuals. Having those metrics. I know Ms. Halstead, when she was with Mr. Haney's office, she started doing the metrics, and then, things have changed, transpired. But ultimately, I mean, that's what I would like to get to that point is, having a 5-year plan, what we call it in private sector. That's what we do all the time. Sometimes it feels foolish, to think long term, but we need to start thinking about, from that private sector, they're always looking at contracts, potentially new business coming in, what that impact is going to be, what kind of workforce they're going to require. Similar situation on us, revenue wise, when we went from online sales to regular sales, we should have started looking at those trends and kind of anticipating what that drop off is. So ultimately, yes, to all those things, yes. Do we need to reinvent? Absolutely. We need to, we started with, doing the 5 S's, as we call the standardization, of processes and lean process. We started to do that, or we tried with the sheriff, to get him the reports and everything. So, I mean, it's all there. It's just things, have been delaying, and there's hiccups here and there. Things are coming. I'm not giving excuses, but ultimately, yes, we need to look into that information and move forward. But I think from my perspective, I want to give Steve the assurance that from my perspective and from this finance committee, what I'm hearing is, to move into that 25% and look at not just next year, but potentially 2 or 3 years down the road, and to maintain that either a 25 to a 27 to a, whatever the case we decide to do so. Right. And strategically start looking at areas that we can obviously implement lean process, whatever you want to call it, in manufacturing, on that aspect of it, across the board. But those are the things that I think, Mr. Chapman, as part of the list, I think those are good talking points that we can start having those conversations with the departments. Not only that, but also procurement, looking at the contracts that we have out there that potentially we probably need to renegotiate or potentially get rid of, or go out for potentially bids that obviously, don't have the term limits, saying a 3-year contract, 5-year contract, or whatever the case may be, to renegotiate some of those pieces of that. So those are the things I think we need to move forward and kind of look at those areas and start planning for our next fiscal cycle. But not only that, multi-year aspect from that aspect of it. So Mr. Girl, did you have anything? I know you popped in. No? Okay. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that was identified a while ago that I think is worthy looking at, it's not a bunch of money, but when you bond out at the jail, there's an extra $50 fee. And if you go to the clerk's office, there's not that $50 fee. I think we need to look at making things equal, maybe have the $50 bond out fee at both facilities. Because I've talked to attorneys that say, oh yeah, I advise my clients save $50 and go across the street and bond out from over there. Maybe that's something to look at. Again, it's not a significant portion, but it's revenue.
Absolutely. Any other comments, questions for Mr. Chapman? Mr. Chapman, any other items or direction that you seek from this finance committee? There you go.
I'm sorry. No, not at this time. I know we want to go into closed session
Yes.
to discuss some litigation. But before we do that, I just want to let the committee know, we did decide to go ahead and sell the bonds. The two bond issues that we did have, we actually sold them yesterday for the 3.2 million for the roads, and then the refunding that we did. We got great rates. The 3.2 million was 1.33% over 10 years. The other refunding was about 1.18. We saved over I think the 10 years, about $150,000 a year, or no, I think it's 150,000 total. So, which is about a 8% revenue source for that. So we had estimated back in, I think, March when we were originally looking at selling about 2%. So yeah, we did very well. So.
All right.
So I guess with that, I guess if we want to go into closed session and have everyone except the board members, Mr. Kolinkas and, State's Attorney's Office online.
Sure. So can I get a motion to go into closed session for pending litigation? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Gurl.
Chairman,
Yes.
if you could also add to that to discuss collective bargaining.
And collective bargaining as well, pending litigation. So I have a motion by Mr. Hoffman, second by Mr. Gurl. So Mr. Schultz, yes or no? Yes. Okay. Mr. Gurl?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
And myself is a yes. So we are now in closed
Good
session.
night.
Steve, I've passed, Steve, this is Gus. I passed hosting over to you, but would you pass it back to me so I can stop the streaming? And so what you do is find help desk, click more, and send me back as host, and it'll just take me a second. I forgot to stop the streaming.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're okay.
No.
Well, I don't